Welcome to the Weird, Wild, and Wonderful Illinois podcast. I am your host, Miranda Bailey Peets with the Illinois State Historical Society. Today we are joined by Adam Krall, who is a graduate of the UIS History Master's Program and currently works as a site interpreter for the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, which covers all of our state sites, and is the host of his own podcast, The Civil Weird, based on weird stories from the Civil War. So, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, again, kind of like the title kind of talks about, this is Weird, Wild, and Wonderful Illinois. So, um, obviously, you probably first question is probably what is the kind of most like unknown thing that people know about, like, people think of Illinois Civil War, they automatically, you think of Lincoln, you think of Grant, John Logan, but what's probably something that doesn't get talked about a lot that people should be more aware of?
Um, just how much and I guess how many, soldiers we give to the fight. We are, just behind New York and Pennsylvania. We're the third state in the Union to give to, the most to the war effort.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just, how how much influence that Illinois has on the entire Civil War. One of my ideas for which I ultimately didn't end up going with, was one of my first master's projects ideas, and it was the thesis was just simply going to be how Illinois won the Civil War,
Hmm.
and it was going to go through, from Lincoln, like you said, Lincoln to Grant to Yates here in Illinois as governor,
Hmm.
Logan in the field, any number of other um, you know, core division army commanders, but other periphery characters like Mother Bickerdike,
Yes.
um, all of these people who have, well, I mean, even if you go to the Confederate side, people who have connections to Illinois prior to the war,
Hmm.
George Pickett wouldn't ever have been heard of if it hadn't have been for certain people in Illinois getting him his commission, or at least his appointment to um, the United States Military Academy, and that one of those people was Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So one of the men that he, would eventually fight in the Civil War was somebody that without him, you never would have heard of George Armstrong or George Pickett at all.
Hmm.
Um, but it's just all of these small connections that Illinois has to the war, um, that a lot of people don't. Well, and now arguably, of course, because the a New York cavalry regiment will argue this to the death, but the Eighth Illinois Cavalry, um, like I said, arguably they've got the marker at the crossroads, so they
Hmm.
can have claim to fame. But they're the ones who fire the first shot, essentially at the Battle of Gettysburg.
Okay. Yeah.
Lieutenant Marcellus Jones gets up on a fence and fires that shot. And a lot of people who are familiar with the battle know that, but a lot of people who just kind of have a passing interest in the Civil War or Gettysburg really don't know that. But we influenced the Civil War in more ways than just the big guy
Big
Lincoln.
names. Yeah. I think probably one of my favorite, I guess, quote, not as big, not as well known commanders in the field was definitely General Grierson. Um,
Absolutely,
yeah, I grew up outside of Jacksonville, so I grew up with a lot of General Grierson, but outside of Jacksonville, he's really, you know, kind of flies under the radar a lot.
yeah. And that's one of the things. Like I grew up in New Berlin, so
Hmm.
I mean I'm right there, and I used to go to Grierson Days every
Yes,
year.
yes.
Which my colleague and I have actually gone over to Jacksonville and talked to them about, hopefully here in the next couple of years, getting it kind of re-going, or reinvigorated, if you will, and
Hmm.
restart. But yeah, Grierson, Ben Grierson, the cavalry commander who hated horses,
Yeah.
um, a music teacher,
Hmm.
who the reason I can understand why he hated horses. He got kicked in the face and almost killed by one when he was a kid.
Yeah.
So, you hear those stories and people kind of, oh yeah, Grierson's raid. Well, they kind of hear about that, but then, of course, he does that good work in Mississippi and continues to be a good cavalry commander throughout the war, so good that they give him command of the 10th United States Cavalry after
Hmm.
the war and give him a regular Army commission as colonel. And he becomes the first commander of the United States Buffalo Soldiers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for a guy who comes out of a very strong abolitionist and anti slavery area to have those kind of, I guess you would say, anti-racist and progressive, racial views
Hmm.
in the 1860s all the way up to the 1890s when he retires is just kind of amazing to have that for Central Illinois and knowing kind of our past with, you know, race relations or race riot, people who settled here from the South, people were
Hmm.
enslaved here originally, all that kind of stuff. And it's just kind of neat to know that Grierson was that type of person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so who would probably, if you had to pick an Illinois Civil War, I don't want to say, like just a soldier, like army, cavalry, any of the, who would probably be the like craziest, wildest one to come out of Illinois?
Um,
Because, I know that like if I were to pick like New York, I would definitely be like Dan Sickles, hands down. Yeah.
right. How could you
Who
gloss
is,
over the American scoundrel?
yeah, who's Illinois' Dan Sickles?
Oh boy. Um, that's wow. Well, if you look at it this way, he's not so much Sickles in a sense that his name was John. His anglicized or Americanized name is John B. Turchin.
Okay.
Uh, his real name is Ivan B. Turchinov, and he was from Russia, and his wife Nadine is her Americanized name, but Nadezhda,
Hmm.
who was from Poland, they immigrate here to the United States in the 1850s, buy a farm in Long Island, New York, and basically stay on that farm for an entire year and learn English.
Hmm.
They learn it extremely well. And they basically, after that, they sell their farm and make their way into the United States officially. And we think through research that we've done, he meets George B. McClellan, General George B. McClellan, as a young
Hmm.
officer in the Crimean War because Turchin was serving in the Russian army there. Um, but when he comes to the United States and he starts to go into the interior, he gets a hold of George McClellan, and McClellan makes him a engineer for the Illinois Central Railroad.
Hmm.
So yet another weird connection from Illinois to the Civil War. You have at this point Turchin, McClellan, and another guy who I'm very happy to see getting a rehabilitation lately is Ambrose E. Burnside, all
Oh,
working together.
Burnside, yeah.
Yeah, for the Illinois Central Railroad. And with that being said, the war comes. Turchin gets a commission in an Illinois infantry regiment because he is one of the only people like Grant in the state of Illinois that have prior military experience. And so he gets command of a regiment, and then he would get command of a brigade, and then he would have on his record in 1862 what was called the Sack of Athens, not to be confused with Athens,
Not
Illinois,
Athens, no.
but the Sack of Athens, Alabama. And what Turchin does is they so his men get wounded
Hmm.
from civilian fire from the town. And so he marches his men into the town and he says, and I quote, I turn my back and close my eyes for 2 hours.
Hmm.
And so he lets his men sack the town and they destroy the town. They steal as much as they can. There, of course, are some bad outcomes of this. There is a sexual assault that happens outside of town.
Hmm.
Those are court martialed and dealt with. But Turchin allows his men to do in that town what would eventually become the modus operandi for all United States forces, which was we are not going to be conciliatory any longer. This is
Hmm.
now a war of conquest. And Turchin gets court-martialed. There's a guy in the office in the officer corps that does not like him, and
Hmm.
that happens to be Don Carlos Buell.
Ah,
Uh,
Buell, yes.
and another Illinois connection. But Don Carlos Buell is a slave owner, and Turchin abhors slavery, is
Hmm.
absolutely fully abolitionist. And so, kind of with that, Buell gets him charged for insubordination, conduct unbecoming, several different charges, but he has to go on trial in Washington, D.C. And the head of the court martial is future President Garfield.
Okay.
And Garfield and Turchin become friends. They sit down, they go out at night together, they have
Hmm.
meals. Garfield is extremely interested in his military experience. He's extremely smart, polyglot, and all the above. And
Hmm.
basically, Garfield says you're going to be convicted. There's insurmountable amounts of evidence here. And Turchin says, well, that may be the case, but I think I have an ace up my sleeve. And that
Hmm.
ace up my sleeve was his wife.
Okay.
And his wife comes to DC, talks to a few officers that she can't get any headway with, and so then she goes to the man himself and goes to speak to Abraham Lincoln. This is when you could just walk up to the White House and knock on the door.
Yeah. It's crazy to
And
think about. Yeah.
no kidding. And so she walks up to the door and basically gets a meeting with the president and says, you can't do this. You're going to cashier a man out of the army that is a good officer. His men love him, and he's doing the job that you want him to do. And Lincoln says, wait a second. So what you don't understand is that I already have it planned. I'm going to promote your husband.
Hmm.
Okay. So what does that mean? Well, he's in a court martial right now with men that are now going to be at a lower rank than him, which is not possible via military code of conduct.
Hmm.
So he's going to be convicted. He's going to be cashiered out of the army, but it's immediately going to be null and void because he can't be convicted by men of a lesser rank. So, with that being said, yes, you're absolutely right. What we're going to start doing from this point forward is we're going to essentially crush the South, take their will to fight via taking their means,
Hmm.
material goods, and slaves. And then after that, yeah. So basically, yes, ma'am, your husband's staying in the army, even though he's getting court-martialed and kicked out, and he's going to be
Hmm.
for his punishment, he's going to get a higher rank.
There we go. Such a
But
bad punishment.
right, and so with that being all of that being said, he gets his higher rank. He, of course, is respected by men in the army of the Tennessee, which at the Battle of Chickamauga in September of 1863, Turchin doesn't mess up like Sickles does. He actually fights his way into a mess. He takes prisoners and then realizes that he's completely surrounded. And so he tells his men, about face, charge to the rear. And so
Hmm.
they abandon their prisoners, they about face, and they charge back through Confederate lines. And Garfield is above on a ridge watching all of this happen, along with the Rock of Chickamauga, George Henry Thomas.
Hmm.
And they see this happen and they both look at each other and say, that is one of the most awesome and insane things that we've ever seen. But that was Turchin. He lives
That
out
was
the rest of the
Churchill.
war, survives, comes back to Illinois, and then he and his wife start. Well, they try to start a community for expat Poles. So
Okay.
they start to have people come over here from Poland, and they start raid on Illinois.
Hmm.
Uh, so if you ever go there to Radon, there is a giant Polish Catholic church there, and there are still a large community of Polish Catholics. It never really, explodes into the utopia that they want it to, but
Yeah.
yeah, that's Ivan B. Turchin.
Nice. Yeah. He sounds like a fun guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he's wild. And like I said, the whole situation of the court martial, all these guys that he meets and becomes friends with. I mean, he knows essentially he knows a president and he knows future presidents out of this whole thing. It's wild.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so speaking of soldiers that really kind of made a difference and, especially like, you know, people again kind of know the story, may not know the story. What can you tell me about Albert Cashier?
Ah, so Albert Cashier, member of the 95th Illinois Infantry Regiment, Volunteer Infantry Regiment. they leave Illinois in 1862, don't come back until 65, and in that time frame, they fight in 42 separate engagements, and they go over 12,000 miles in their service, 4,000 miles on foot, and 8,000 miles by rail and river.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
That's a lot of
they
travel.
yeah. I mean, even for an infantry regiment in the Civil War, you're not going to have that much.
Mm-mm.
You're going to be stationed, in a lot of different spots, but they are what seemingly is everywhere in the South. They do a lot of work in Mississippi, in the Vicksburg campaign. Half or at least a quarter of the regiment gets captured on May 23rd of 63 in what would be called the Forlorn Hope.
Hmm.
Grant was trying to smash through the Confederate lines at Vicksburg. Several regiments get cut off and surrounded, and members of the 95th, including Albert Cashier, get captured with their battle flag.
Hmm.
And they get that flag back that night by overpowering and killing their captors in a Mississippi regiment that have taken them. They get the flag back and they get back to Union lines. And when they get back to Union lines, Cashier climbs up into a pine tree behind Union lines and starts shaking the flag at the rebels and crowing like a rooster and yelling, "We got it back! We got it back!" And then starts to take fire from the Confederate lines and then comes
Yeah.
down. But Cashier um, would join the regiment in 62, go all the way with his comrades from there to the end of the war, through the Grand Review, come back to Illinois, um, go back to their hometown, work as a lamplighter, a field hand, farm laborer, um, anything to work or do with your hands, Cashier does pretty much for
Hmm.
the rest of their life. They get their pension, everything like that. And then an accident happens. A Illinois senator is backing out of his driveway in 1904, no less,
Hmm.
and runs Cashier over and breaks his leg. Uh, Breaks it bad enough to where, of course, they've got to go to the doctor, and the doctor and nurse that are treating Cashier find something out. And what they find out is that Cashier is actually a woman, a trans man, if you will.
Okay. Yeah.
And when they discover this, they get a hold of the senator and they say, "Look, we just discovered something and we're going to keep our mouths shut. And we would like you to also
Hmm.
do that. However, he is now incapacitated and cannot do manual labor. So we need to get him into the soldiers and sailors home down in Quincy, Illinois.
Hmm.
When we do that, we're not going to say anything. If you don't say anything, I think everybody will be fine and we can keep this quiet and just leave it as it is."
Yeah.
With that, they do. They stay quiet. They get Cashier into the soldiers and sailors home down in Quincy. And then for the next couple of years, he's fine, living amongst his former comrades. And then uh, what happened is he falls into dementia. And at that point, they cannot care for him any longer at the soldiers and sailors home. And there is no other recourse at that time.
Hmm.
Uh, there is no, I guess you would say, like we have nursing homes now or
Yeah.
assisted living communities. In this instance, Cashier gets sent to the only place they can send him, which is up to the Illinois Asylum for the Mentally Insane in Moline, Illinois, East Moline, Illinois.
Hmm.
And they go there, and the doctors very quickly realize what is occurring. And of course, to them, this is nothing but a pure mental illness.
Yeah.
We're going to now, they're going to call Cashier by their birth name or dead name, which is Jenny.
Hmm.
Uh, they're going to dress them in dresses, which at this point, they're so far into dementia, they have no idea of what's occurring to them.
Yeah.
Um, all of this said, this is only causing more pain and more suffering, and essentially it's torture.
Hmm.
Uh, Cashier's comrades find out that he's in this asylum and go there and find out what's going on. And when they discover what's occurring, they take Cashier out of that mental asylum. We of course we have no record, and I've tried to get the records from there, myself and a couple of my colleagues, and we've been told either they don't exist,
Mm-hmm.
they're missing, which that's even more troubling,
Yeah.
or we cannot get them because we are not family members.
Mm-hmm.
Which the latter one I completely understand. The first two, I don't believe. I think
Right.
that those are there, and I think with not to get too deep into it, but with our current political climate, it's kind of one of those things where they don't want the hassle or the headache, and so
Mm-hmm.
they're going to keep them close to the vest, or they truly don't exist any longer. They were
Yeah.
destroyed. I don't know. However, with all that being said, um, Cashier is removed by his comrades from that hospital, taken amongst them, and they care for him for the rest of his life until he passes away a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
But when Cashier dies, they bury him with his name, Albert Cashier, and
Mm-hmm.
then just underneath, and I don't think it's out of the sign of disrespect or dead naming or anything like that. I think they wanted people to be able to know and find out who Cashier actually was for
Mm-hmm.
possible research purposes. To say this was a an American who was born Jenny Hodgers in Cullotta, Ireland, came here as a stowaway. Their uncle makes them live as a boy to get a job,
Mm-hmm.
and they are, for all intents and purposes, a boy and a man for the rest
Mm-hmm.
of their life. And their comrades bury them as such, and then they just put on their AKA Jenny Hodgers, born Cullotta, Ireland. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I truly think they put that on there just as a research measure and because
Yeah.
they knew. I
Yeah.
truly think they knew. 4 years or 3.5 years of combat, with people you're with all the time.
Yeah.
No, there's no way that that's hidden for that long. Somebody, I don't care who you are, if you live in any, let's take my instance, my house. I'm the youngest of six.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there, there are things you don't want to know about people that you find out. But like I said, there's no way that they didn't know. And I think that was just out of respect to say that, yeah, we knew and we didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always find his story so incredibly fascinating because especially the fact that his fellow soldiers rallied around him,
Yeah.
in a time where, that wasn't really talked about. People don't talk about, how many women actually fought in the Civil War as men,
Yeah.
whether it was, just for the war effort so they could be near their husbands, or in his case, he truly was living, as a boy and then as a man for all of his life. So,
Right.
um, and I think it's great that we can now bring those stories out
Yeah.
and,
No, I'm sorry. I was going to try to cut you off. I was just going to
yeah.
say it's, for him to go through as much combat as he did through all of that and really not
Hmm.
even receive a scratch.
Yeah.
But, to nearly get captured again at Bryce's Crossroads in 1864 by one of the meanest cavalry commanders that's ever walked the face of the earth, Nathan
Oh
Bedford
yeah.
Forrest. I mean,
Yeah.
and to get out of that situation, along with our, our own regiment here in Springfield, the 114th, a good
Hmm.
portion of the regiment was captured there and sent to Andersonville. So to be able to get out of that, still tell that story, and then, to have the respect of your comrades forever
Hmm.
is an amazing story that, it gets glossed over. But, you know, you mentioned all the other women who fight, and not just for the United States side. There's women that fight for the Confederacy as well. But
Hmm.
a really, really good book that was written, oh my goodness, I want to say 20, 25 years ago now. Dating myself. But it's called They Fought Like Demons.
Hmm.
Um, and it goes through several different instances during the war of women that dressed as men and fought. And there were people who knew. I mean,
Hmm.
there were, and they don't explicitly mention Cashier and his comrades knowing, but there are other soldiers that fought, and they absolutely knew, and they just
Yeah.
didn't care because
Hmm.
you're not going to really care about somebody what their gender or sex is when they're standing next to you in a battle line and they're doing the same thing you are, and possibly at some point carrying you off because you're wounded or you know
Hmm.
your guts back in you because you're hurt. You don't care who or what they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there no secrets in the foxhole.
Right.
So and I always find, people might look at like an Albert Cashier story and be like, that's a weird, wild, part of Illinois history. But, I also think that, that's a wonderful part of Illinois history.
Yeah.
That, these things did happen, and the fact that we have the records, we can talk about them, and they saved, like you said, they put on the tombstone, her birth name.
Yeah.
Just say, yeah, she existed. Um,
Yeah.
as a she for, you know, however many years, and we acknowledge that, but we really acknowledge him as Albert Cashier. Um,
Right.
I think it's just,
Yeah, and private Albert cashier. I mean, collected a pension, you know, got a uniform, was mustered out, went through the
hmm
grand review in DC. So, I mean, just as much a soldier as, uh, uh, Leroy Key or
hmm
George Coleman or any of these other guys. I see. I did it right there. George Coleman. So I did. His name is Coleman George. Do you know how difficult it is to keep those two names together and keep them properly? Oh my god.
that's crazy. Coleman
Yeah.
George. That's yeah.
Oh
Sounds
yeah.
like it's one of those like Coleman, comma George.
You're absolutely right. And I would much rather deal with Key's son Barzillai, who has had his name spelled in every possible wrong way you could, than have to
hmm
deal with Coleman George
hmm
ever again. Good man, did lots of wonderful things, was a hero, but still, I'm good on him for a while.
Yeah. So are there any instances, and I studied Civil War, a lot in college and high school and stuff, but um I know that, like when you go to Gettysburg, there's stories of, the bacteria that glue in the dark, the soldiers that glue in the dark.
Oh,
Or
that's actually Shiloh, but
that was
still, no,
Shiloh,
you're
yeah.
right. You're right. Yep.
Uh,
Right.
there were, weird stories like that, but obviously Illinois doesn't have battlefields. There's no battlefields to come visit in Illinois, except, you can go to like, camps in Cairo down south there,
Right.
Camp Butler and but there's not really like, those battlefield kind of stories. But are there any things that are, similar that have happened in Illinois that, people can be like, oh, at Camp Butler this happens, or if you go to Camp Douglas today, you find this, or you know,
Yeah.
Lincoln walks
I
at midnight and
right. No, and I mean, I've heard stories about up at Camp Douglas, which is now basically the University of Illinois, or it's either I think it's UIC or it's University of Chicago, but either way,
hmm
that whole area was Camp Douglas, and one of the things that they found out that was happening around there is that there's a large Confederate grave that's up there
hmm
of these men that died in Douglas, but there are dozens, if not probably maybe into the lower hundreds that were just disposed of in Lake Michigan.
Ooh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. Um, and so I've heard that, if you go out there to that spot where these guys were dumping Confederates into the lake, I've heard that you can hear voices out there.
hmm
Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I haven't been there myself to experience it, but I've heard that myself. But what was happening was that these guys were getting paid 50 cents to take these bodies out there, and it was basically a quarter for them, and then
hmm
it was a quarter to pay for the box and everything else. Well, these guys that were driving this wagon figured out one day, well, they're just rebels. They don't have a name, and we don't really care. So why don't we just dump them in the lake, and then we'll
Yeah.
keep the quarter.
Yeah.
So they did. They were dumping so many in the lake at one point. There were Confederates washing up on the shore near Chicago or in Chicago, and they thought that there was actually an invasion coming from somewhere across the lake.
Oh my
And so
gosh.
there was a legitimate fear that there was going to be a Confederate invasion of the city of Chicago because these guys were dumping bodies in the lake. So if you go up there, and I'm not exactly sure where the spot is, I don't think anybody really is,
hmm
but I've heard that story reiterated a couple times up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think that there's so many that were washing up on the shoreline. You'd think people would be like, maybe stop doing that.
Oh, they did. They got caught.
Yeah.
landed up getting caught because eventually there was an officer who was like, "There's no way."
Hmm.
And I think I'd have to look into the research a little bit again, but I'm almost certain that there was a Confederate who washed up on shore, and one of the officers knew where he came from, which was Camp Douglas, and he was like,
Hmm.
"Yeah, I think we need to follow these guys and find out what's going on." So they
Yeah.
do, and that's how they catch him.
Hmm.
But yeah, still, they were doing it enough to where people were afraid of it.
Yeah. One question I always ask everybody, is what are some myths about Illinois and the Civil War that need to be dispelled, that keep perpetrating, and you still have to keep saying, no, that didn't really happen that way, or no, that's completely made up, that
Yeah.
are still like, people swear that it happened.
Um, One of them is that Lincoln is not here. That's always my favorite one because I deal with that one on a weekly basis
Hmm.
uh, at the Lincoln Tomb, and it's almost like that story that you hear about Confederate gold at the end of the war.
Hmm.
There was a trainload of Confederate gold that was on its way to Canada, the moon. I don't know
Yeah.
wherever it was going, but it sank in a lake or wherever.
Yeah.
But that kind of gets thrown around about Lincoln, and a lot of people think that Abraham Lincoln is in the Lincoln Memorial in D.C.
Hmm.
because it's the Lincoln Memorial,
Memorial. Yeah.
and a lot of people think that Abraham Lincoln is not at his tomb because of that train ride, that 1,700 miles it takes to get him from there to here.
Hmm.
A lot of people have been misinformed and have been told that he's not in Illinois.
Yeah.
Somehow, some way, they've heard that along the line, and they never took the time to actually sit down and do the research to figure out. No, he actually is in Illinois, but there's one of the major reasons why is because of J.C. Powers. He was um, one of the first superintendents at the site at the Lincoln Tomb. And when the attempted theft of Lincoln's remains happens in 1876,
Hmm.
he moves Lincoln's remains around inside of that tomb. We have a count of at least 15 times.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's not counting the small micro moves where they had to move him because the tomb was deteriorating or, you know,
Hmm.
other reasons why. However, he calls it himself. He calls it his honest deception because he's moving Lincoln around and keeping him safe, but he and Robert and a couple of other people are the only ones who know that Lincoln is not back in that marble sarcophagus in the burial chamber.
Hmm.
So, with that said, that gets out later on, and a lot of people think that again, Abraham Lincoln's not there. He's in D.C., he's in Chicago. I've heard he's under the Washington Monument. That'd be kind of cool. Um, but
Random.
right, and it's mostly people that are from Illinois that believe that stuff.
Hmm.
I started last year kind of tracking it, kind of unofficially, just to see where people are from when they say that. And most of the time, it's from people from Illinois. So we have done a very poor job of informing our own populace about something that is interesting, but it's not as conspiratorial as a lot of people think that it is. And a lot of
Hmm.
people think that, he was moved because insert Kennedy conspiracy theory here.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the same thing that people believe that John Wilkes Booth wasn't really killed in
Hmm.
Garrett Barn. He escaped and then he lived out the rest of his life in Oklahoma and Missouri. And it's like, no, I'm fairly certain that the man who shot him was afraid that he was going to be killed for the rest of his life for shooting him. But
Yeah.
okay, I mean, but like I said, that's one of them. And I would say also the whole Sherman's March, um, uh, it being one of the worst atrocities of war crimes that's ever been committed. If you talk to people who don't really understand what happened, and Illinois gets
Hmm.
maligned a lot in that because Illinois soldiers were a bulk
Hmm.
of Sherman's army. Um, and even people that are Northerners, they would be brought up on war crimes. No, they would not. They
Hmm.
absolutely would not. What he did and what he did in Georgia during that march was no worse or no better than what other commanders in that war had already done. And as we talked about Turchin earlier,
Hmm.
this was the way that it was going to work. Georgia was the last state in the Confederacy that was able to supply men and materiel to the war effort.
Hmm.
Only one way you can stop that, and that's destroy it. And so they
Yeah.
did destroy it. But you will hear people say that there were hundreds, I've heard thousands of sexual assaults and rapes and, any number of other things that just did not happen. And not to
Hmm.
say that they didn't, because they did, but they were dealt with right then and there. And I think Illinois gets a little bit of malignment because of that, unjustly, because of, well, essentially because of the lost cause narrative. But
Hmm.
that's an entirely other show.
Yeah. Yeah, my ancestors all came from the Shenandoah Valley, so I'm definitely like what Sherman did was nothing compared to what Sheridan did.
Right. Exactly. And I
Yeah.
mean, you're absolutely right. But, states, people, armies, commanders, they they get that, one brush all the way across. And,
Hmm.
you know, you have to take the nuances of everybody. And like I said, I find William Tecumseh Sherman to be, if you take his pre-war and wartime service, awesome. He is
Hmm.
what you want a field commander to be at all times.
Hmm.
Then if you stop in 1865 and you look forward after that, you really don't like William Tecumseh Sherman that much,
Yeah.
because he does to our native population in this country, and to bring Sheridan back up, both
Hmm.
of them, both of them are just horrific human beings with
Yeah.
no empathy and no care for any human suffering that goes on through that. But like I
Mhm.
said, I just think that Illinois gets kind of painted with that brush in a couple of different ways. And anyway,
Yeah. So, going back to the Lincoln tomb, now he is, from what I understand, he's not buried in the monument. He's not underneath that monument. He's actually like behind it, but then like 10 foot down.
yeah. So essentially, inside of the burial chamber, there you walk in, and when you look to the right, that's where Mr. Lincoln's headstone is, and
Hmm.
it's 9 tons of Arkansas red arc marble, and 30 inches behind that and 10 feet straight down from there is where he is.
Hmm.
Now, he has concrete and rebar all the way around on all four sides. There's a concrete pad that's 6 inches thick that sits on top of bedrock, because there's a shale shelf that runs basically through the entire city of Springfield to right there. So
Hmm.
where that hillside drops off is where that shelf stops. So
Okay.
awesome. But he's got that, and then he's inside of his coffin, which is cedar, lead lined, lead sealed. That is inside of his casket, the
Hmm.
nice one, and then that is inside of an iron sarcophagus. All of that has concrete, and there's railroad iron embedded in the walls all the way up to the top. So there's no way that you can get at him from any side.
Any direction.
Yeah,
Nobody's getting to him again.
no, never.
No. Um, but yeah, I remember seeing that when I was there for the Death Day stuff. I was like, wait a minute, he's actually not underneath the headstone. He's behind it, but because of the attempt to steal the body, they really, reinforced that to her.
Yeah. And you know what's wild about that is a lot of people think that the night after that happened, boom, they're digging that mine shaft and they're putting him down there. They
Hmm.
don't. That's that whole honest deception thing, is that they move him around in there, and it's, yes, it is to keep him safe, but they do put him underneath the obelisk for a brief period of time. He
Hmm.
is in the northeast corner on the outside of the tomb when they're deconstructing the tomb and reconstructing it because it's falling apart.
Hmm.
Uh, he's over in the residence, which is on site in the basement there for a brief period of time in a concrete lined crypt. So, a lot of people think they pull him out of the ground and they just, chunk him into a shallow grave.
Hmm.
That's never the case. They always do it with, complete reverence and everything like that. And when I mentioned that JC Powers moves him around so many times, some people will say, "Oh, that's just," or he was covered with bricks or debris. That's just wrong.
Hmm.
Actually, it's not. I mean, that's the ultimate respect you could pay to your former commander in chief, is to say and make an oath that this is never going to happen again.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to touch him unless it's us, the Lincoln Guard of Honor, to put him in a spot to keep him safe.
Hmm.
And they protect him for years and years doing that. But it takes 25 years from the night of that theft to the time that he finally is placed down at the bottom of that mine shaft. So,
Wow. Yeah, I didn't
yeah,
realize it was that long.
25 years,
Yeah.
literally.
So that's kind of crazy as well. Just thinking they're just moving him around for 25 years to keep him hidden and safe because, I think I just probably imagined, oh, at least it probably took a year or two to, you know, create that and do it, but I didn't realize it took them 25 years to do that.
Yeah. And they weren't going to do it. They
Hmm.
were, so when they get that deconstruction reconstruction project done, they put Abraham Lincoln back in that marble sarcophagus above ground.
Hmm.
And Robert comes and visits after the job is complete, and he says, "This is wonderful, but why is my father still above ground?" And
Yeah.
they said, "We weren't given any other instructions to put him anyplace else. What would you have us do?" And Robert says, "Well, here's the plan that I came up with for George Pullman up in Chicago." So
Hmm.
he comes up with it, and the same guy who executes the construction project is James Culver, and Colonel Culver says, "Sure, we can do this," and
Hmm.
so they do. But he digs that shaft down, he lines it all the way with concrete, all four sides, and that's how they get it done. But like I said, after they do that, even then, they don't know if they're going to put him in the ground or where they're going to put him. So they just put him above ground again. And Robert sees the new door and everything like that. And basically, he's like, "Man, look at that new door." And Robert's like, "If they want to get through that door, they're going to get through that door.
Hmm.
So here, let's do this."
Yeah.
And that's how Abraham Lincoln ends up 10 feet in a mine shaft, essentially.
Yeah. Speaking of Robert, I've always heard I've heard Robert being referred to as the Forrest Gump of the presidency because he was there for so many huge things
Yeah,
that just like he was there for three presidential assassinations,
three.
and that's just incredible to think about that one person witnessed all those, you know, assassinations, and he was there legitimately. It wasn't like, oh, I'm hanging out and this just happened. I mean, he was there for reasons to be with McKinley. He was there with, you know,
Garfield.
Garfield, and
Yeah.
it just that, it's like what did Robert
Well,
do in a previous life?
that's no kidding. And I mean, to the point where, he's up the street sleeping in the White House at when his father was assassinated at Ford's Theater. He's standing essentially next to Garfield when he's shot in the back, by Charles Guiteau. And then he's on the platform at the train station in Buffalo when McKinley's assassinated. So after that, Robert refused pretty much all invitations to anything involving the chief executive unless it was going to be at the White House,
Yeah.
because he thought himself a jinx. He truly did. He thought,
Hmm.
because I'm here, which I mean, when you're you're connected to three of them in a row, all three of the first ones,
Yeah.
and I tell people that at the tomb that Robert was connected to the first three presidential assassinations up to John F. Kennedy.
Hmm.
It's bonkers, but yeah, he would not. And that was the other thing, is that Robert is kind of the final say in official images of his father.
Hmm.
So when people create things that he doesn't like, one is called the Bellyache Lincoln. There was going to be a statue in DC and another one in London when he was on his way to be the diplomat to the court of St. James. It was going to be an official gift to the royal
Hmm.
crown. They unveiled that thing, and Lincoln was apparently leaning forward, and it looked like he had a stomach ache, and people started to laugh about it.
Hmm.
Robert said, "Nope, absolutely not." And they
Yeah.
destroyed both of them. They trashed
Oh.
them. But the one that he did like was the Lincoln Memorial. He loved
Hmm.
it. He would even say, when it was completed, because he got to see it done, he would have his driver stop in the middle of the traffic circle that used to surround it, and he would have him stop, and he would look at it for a few minutes and say, "Isn't it amazing? Isn't it just amazing?" And
Hmm.
then he would knock on his car door, and the driver would take off. But that was the one that he really liked. The other ones that were created, even the one at the Lincoln Tomb, he did not like the one at the Lincoln Tomb that's 9 feet tall. He
Hmm.
said, at certain points in the day, it made his father look mean, And
Hmm.
then when they had light shining up at it for a brief period of time, it said it made him look scared, and he said he didn't
Mm.
like it. So they took off that light, and there hasn't been a light shining up at it ever since. And that's probably, my goodness, I think that was in the early part of the 1890s or 1900s.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I never I can't imagine the bellyache statue. Like, is there like a picture of it, a drawing, anything
No,
that's out there that people can look up?
no, we have the instance, and we have what the information about what happened at that party at the White House, but they unveiled it at the White House, and that's when it happened. And so basically, the copy or copies never leave the White House grounds.
Mm,
So there you go, and that's it. And they trash them.
yeah. Um, so I know another, like in your job as a site interpreter with the IDNR is, you're obviously like you've talked about, you're at the tomb, but you're also at the old state capitol.
Yeah,
Yeah. And uh from what I understand, that is where Grant was signing up people for the regiments.
yeah. He That whole story is kind of funny too because he gets called down here by Yates from Galena, and Grant is, he retires from the army as a captain,
Hmm.
and he basically comes down to help Yates figure out what we have. We've got an armory here in Springfield that's not very big and not very good, and what it contains also is not very big or very good.
Yeah.
And Grant is sent down there to look at this stuff, and basically he tells Yates, A, this isn't enough, and B, what you have is junk. You have converted flintlock muskets. You need to find out how you can get this stuff exchanged and get the newest stuff that you can. And
Hmm.
so Yates is like, oh, okay, okay, good, good, good. Some of these guys who are coming down here, they're not really well trained, and they're not really well organized. You having the experience that you do, Captain Grant, is there any way that you could stick around for a little bit longer, help me out with this? And then Grant says, okay, that's fine. He's like, but I want a commission. I want to get
Hmm.
into a regiment. And Yates, yeah, 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 yeah. We'll get you in there. We'll get you a regiment. Sure, sure. Soon, soon, soon. Can you go over here and take? And Grant's like, okay. And so he does. And then he goes back to the governor's mansion and he tells Yates, look, I can't keep doing this because I'm going to miss this. I'm going to miss my opportunity to get a commission. You're going to forget or whatever it's going to be. But either way, I'm going back to my birth state, which is Ohio, and I'm going to get a commission there because they
Hmm.
already asked me to.
Yeah.
And that's when Yates basically gets his bluff called and he says, okay, fine. Here's your commission. You're now colonel of the 21st Illinois. And
Hmm.
so that's why Grant doesn't get a commission until the 21st because a lot of people are like, oh, well, Grant was probably in the first regiment that left Illinois. He
Hmm.
wasn't. He was in the 21st, and the 21st leaves Springfield. He marches them. He marches them from Springfield all the way over to Jacksonville so they can figure out, is this something you really want to do?
Right.
Gets them on the trains in Jacksonville, gets them to Quincy, and then Quincy down to Cairo.
Hmm.
But with all of that said, Grant's first office is underneath the gallery steps next to the general's office in the old state capitol.
Hmm.
So yeah, you're right. He starts signing up men there. He goes through our arms and equipment. He helps start Camp Yates, which is where my high school sits, Sacred Heart Griffin.
Hmm.
He had a cottage right there,
Yeah.
which still stands. Um, but then, of course, after they have a few problems at Camp Yates, which is men sneaking into Springfield and drinking. One
Hmm.
instance where they have a horse race and somebody gets run over. They're also stealing chickens and eggs from
Oh
the,
man.
and so Grant, Sherman, and a couple of other officers find another spot that is where Camp Butler now is.
Hmm.
They go out to Butler because it's called Clear Lake, and there's a spring-fed Clear Lake out there that they can water horses, men, and everything else, and so that's how Camp Butler gets formed.
Hmm.
But
I
that's all.
Yeah, that's and I I always think, there's, when you go to the old state capitol, obviously it's beautiful, but there's, people walk in because they want to see where Lincoln gave the House Divided speech.
Mhm.
They, you know, that's, a big forefront. And it's like Grant had his first office there. Grant
Yeah,
was signing up soldiers. that was really his entree into the Civil War.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's right there that you can go see.
right. And we don't, like I said, we don't talk about. I mean, and we do more so now. Grant and the brief time that he was there at the early part of the war and everything like that. And I mean, we have uh, our adjutant generals are amazing.
Hmm.
Without their help, Illinois and Governor Yates, for that matter, without their help, Illinois would have been a disorganized mess, just like any of the other states, except for they had that type of talent right here.
Hmm.
And even though Yates could be a real pain in the you know what, he was still good at his job. And
Hmm.
Lincoln really appreciated the effort that he puts forth. And then when he needs him to in 1864 to step aside, so somebody like Oglesby can take the reins and actually get the 13th Amendment passed in the next year,
Hmm.
he does.
Yeah.
I mean, he basically, and I mean, he's kind of sick too, but still, I mean, he really does step aside so Oglesby can get that job done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, speaking of, with Oglesby coming in, I I know some people, again, it's one of those things that, once you learn about it, oh, this is a great thing for Illinois, but, you know, Lyman Trumbull and Governor Oglesby and all of them that worked together to get, Illinois was the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment.
Yep.
That, there was so much history that happens in Illinois, and it's just, not just Springfield, but, in the entire state that, I think gets, I don't want to say overshadowed, but isn't as much talked about or as well known talked about because of the statue of Abraham Lincoln. And,
Yeah.
it's we talk about Lincoln passing the 13th Amendment, and we don't always think about what Lyman, Trumbull and all them did to get the 13th Amendment passed in Illinois.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it was a constant fight. And I,
Hmm.
if you look at our relationship with civil rights here in Illinois, there was a lot of questions of whether that was going to happen or not because we still
Hmm.
had the black codes on the books.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to end slavery. We're going to be the first state to ratify the 13th Amendment, which ends slavery forever. And we still have black codes on the books from
Hmm.
a now serving United States senator who's going to help us get the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment passed.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, that's all hypothetical in 1864. And I mean, at that point, Lincoln even tells people in up till essentially November that I'm going to be beaten and beaten badly in this election, but the army votes for him. There's two things that happen that summer,
Hmm.
and you even have people here in Illinois, which Sangamon County never votes for Lincoln. They both presidential elections, our county goes for his opponent.
Hmm.
However, like I said, with those two things that happened that summer, with Sherman taking Atlanta and Grant continuing to hammer Robert E. Lee back into the defenses of Petersburg and not retreating back to D.C., that's how continues to keep the army and get their
Hmm.
vote. And that translates back here to people in Illinois saying, well, I don't like him all that much, but I guess he's on the right track. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And you're right. You have people like Trumbull and Yates and Oglesby and all of these guys who were willing to work with not only Lincoln, who was ostensibly a moderate, but
Hmm.
willing to work with the radical Republicans who were basically saying, in 1864, when this is over with, we're going to hang all of them. And then when we're done with that, cutting the ropes down, we're going to put black men in Congress right away.
Hmm.
Everyone that had none of those leanings were just horrified at what had occurred. And Lincoln and a lot of these guys found a way for them to work together and keep it all together. Now, who knows what would have happened had Lincoln survived into 1866 and 67, it might have all
Hmm.
fallen apart, but
Yeah,
we're never going to know.
we're never gonna know. And you touch on, holding, not even, Sangamon County voted for Lincoln, but you know, again, that great divide that is Illinois is, north of Springfield is, very much northern abolitionist, but southern Illinois was very Copperhead. They were very Confederate.
Oh
And
yeah,
and so there was, so much fraction just within our own state. It wasn't, oh, Illinois is a great, union state and we're sending all the soldiers because, and everybody in the state 100% agrees, like a Massachusetts would, or
Yeah.
New York. I mean, southern third of the state was, very much against the North.
Sure. Well, I mean, so was Sangamon County too. Sangamon
Hmm.
County in 1862, after Grant takes Henry and Donelson, there is a boatload of Confederate prisoners that are coming north right here.
Hmm.
And Yates finds out about it, and he writes a letter to Lincoln, and it doesn't reach him in time. They get to Springfield before it happens, but he says, if you bring them here to Springfield, you're not going to have just 6,000 Confederates in a prison camp. You're going to have 15,000 Copperheads in an army plus them at the front door. Do not send them here.
Hmm.
He was terrified of what was going to happen.
Yeah.
They got here anyway, and they still went into Butler.
Hmm.
And, what happens there happens. Of course, you have men that die. And then at the beginning, people go out there and they see they're cold and they're knitting them mufflers and socks and stuff like that and stocking caps. And then Shiloh happens, and there's not food and knitted goods coming over the wall. It's bricks and bottles.
Hmm.
Because I mean, there is a massive casualty list that comes back here to Central Illinois, and they're not happy about it. As a matter of fact, after those men get removed from there are 3 Confederate soldiers at Camp Butler that are there to do administrative work and paperwork, and they get paroled into the city by themselves. They get a pass to go into town and get some refreshment, have some drinks, whatever. And long story short, 2 out of the 3 make it back to camp. None of them
Hmm.
make it back unwounded. One of them gets stabbed to death in Springfield.
Wow.
Yeah. So our relationship with the South, the Confederacy, with the war, with Lincoln, everything is very, very complicated because, like I said, we have Copperheads here who are very pro slavery.
Hmm.
Uh, you have, well, you have an officer of the 114th Illinois who resigns his commission because he says, I will, when emancipation goes into effect, he says, I will not fight for them. And he doesn't use
Hmm.
that word. And he literally gives his sword back because he is that virulent of a racist that he will not fight for black freedom.
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's Illinois.
That's Illinois.
And can't forget this, in Southern Illinois, even Logan's cousins go and fight for the Confederacy in Tennessee. They're called the First Illinois Confederate, but they are Company H, or pardon me, Company K of the Seventh Tennessee. So
Wow.
we literally give a unit to the Confederate Army to fight.
Hmm.
So yeah, Illinois is a rather complicated place when it comes to the Civil War or anything else that, for that matter.
But yeah, it just, and I don't think so many people don't realize that aspect of, because it's, the Civil War came, Illinois fought for the North, Abraham Lincoln was the president, and that's kind of where it ends. But the the truth behind it is way, way more complicated than, just the happy, shiny, we fought for the North, we won, we sent
Right,
a bunch of soldiers,
right.
um, and I, like you brought up Shiloh, we did a this day in Illinois history post on the first day of Shiloh.
Mm.
And I, started getting comments on social media about like, well, what does this have to do with Illinois history? Like the 4,000 people that died at Shiloh,
A lot of them came from here.
4,000 Illinois soldiers dead or wounded at Shiloh. You know, the
Yeah,
monument at the Illinois Monument at Shiloh is like the biggest monument on the battlefield because we,
yeah,
contributed so many soldiers to that
yeah,
to that battle. And,
absolutely.
and I just, being able to talk about, some of the realities of Illinois and the Civil War, I think, has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem, Randy. That's been fun.
Yeah.